Welcome, everyone, to the Voice of Meaning. And we have a special podcast today with Solomon Makola. And Solomon currently is in South Africa, the town of Welcome. Where are you exactly?
In the central part of South Africa, in the province called Free State, and the town is called Welkom.
Welcome. And I asked my chat GPT, how far away are you from me? And it answered 8,700 miles. So
8,700 miles. Wow.
yeah, which is about about 14,000 kilometers. So
that is a long way.
yes, it's technology is amazing.
It
And
is.
yes, we used to have to write letters and wait a couple weeks or pay $20 to send a telex or something like that back in the old days. Right. Solomon is very dear to my heart. I consider him my nephew. I met him in 2011 at a logotherapy conference, and we'll talk a little bit about logotherapy later. And I immediately recognized that I have a soul connection with Solomon. And I know there are some people who believe that there is no soul, and it could be a gut connection, a heart connection, but I felt a connection with Solomon. And I said, I'm your uncle.
Indeed.
And ever since then, about 12 years, it's been 12 years since that conference, you call me Uncle Neil. Any thoughts about what it means to you?
Well, if I were to refresh your memory, Uncle Neil, I think the first time we met was on Facebook.
Yes.
And then I used to post a lot of messages on Facebook, and I did a postcast with the grandchild of no, it was with Mary Simuluka.
Right.
Yes, I did a podcast with her, and I think that is how we connected on Facebook. And I remember you sending me several copies of logotherapy books, and one of them was titled Guideposts to Meaning by Joseph Fabry. And it's a book that I've been looking for. And in fact, when you sent me that copy in 2010, I had borrowed a copy from our university library and refusing to return it for 10 years until you sent me that copy. And that was only when that I handed the university copy back, because now I had a personal copy. And that is how we first met. I think you were in Alaska at that time when you sent me the copies. And then subsequently, that was when we met face to face in Dallas, Texas in 2011. And, you know, ours was, you know, a divine meeting, in a sense that in you, I could identify, you know, you as an uncle, because, you know, having been brought up by a spiritual father, then you know that, you know, the one man can be, only one man can give seed to you. But it takes so many other people in your life who will invest into that seed to make sure that it is well nourished. And you are one of the men that have played a significant role in my life. And hence I refer to you as an uncle, to say, in the spiritual realm, as an orphan myself, double orphan for that matter, I met wonderful people in my life. My father will often say, how do you know that God loves you? And we know that God loves us when he sends us people in our lives who will just love us, and we don't know why. What have we done that these people love us so much? And you are one of the people just who came into my life, and you just loved me. You first showered me with love, and I reciprocated back to that lover, said, well, this is my uncle. And yeah, that is how I came to identify you as my uncle.
That's very, very moving, and I'm very proud of this particular nephew.
Thank
Um,
you.
you
Thank you.
spent your childhood and much of your teenage years under apartheid in South
Mm.
Africa. Any reflections about how it was to live under those rules?
Well, living under those laws was quite a difficult situation. I mean, my grandparents and parents used to stay in a place called Botshabelo. And in English, it literally means place of refuge. So they stayed there under the leadership of a German missionary. His name was Alexander Merensky. So my family stayed in that mission station for almost 120 years. And you will not believe that, I got to get the first taste of apartheid when I was only 2 years old. I was born in 1973, and in 1975, in South Africa, we used to have a law that is called the Group Areas Act law. In other words, if you are speaking a certain language, you will be sent to go and stay in a certain homeland. And the big cities were only meant for whites only. So my family stayed in that mission house, like I said, for 120 years. And after 120 years of having stayed there in the Lutheran church missionary, then the then government decided that, no, we've got other plans with this piece of land, and therefore everybody else who is here was disposed, put on trucks and sent to different locations. And that is how my family ended in a village where we are staying. It's called Tafelkop. Basically means table head in the northern part of South Africa. So that's why we ended. So the area where we are staying even now, we moved there because of the Group Areas Act law. So that was, how as a youngster, I got to feel the harsh realities of apartheid. And of course, during those times, we stayed in the villages. There was no running water. There was no electricity. Most of the services were only in big cities. And even in the big cities, you will have your towns and your suburbs. And then there's an area where blacks stay. It's called townships. And most of those townships they had running water, but there was no electricity. So those were some of the harsh realities. The other thing that I can tell you about apartheid, my father used to stay in Johannesburg. He stayed in a men's hostel. So every time we visit my father in Johannesburg, in the men's hostel, it meant I was allowed to go in. My sister had to wait, at the gate, and I had to go in, call my father, tell him we have arrived, and he will only come then at the gate, greet my sister, and find alternative, accommodation for her with relatives, because she couldn't sleep at the hostels because that was a place for men only, because of the migrant labor system. Most of the men moved from the rural areas and then came into this urban area, and they were only subjected to have to stay in a certain area, and only boys were allowed to visit those areas. And you can imagine, how hard so my sister would be every time we visit. She must remain at the gate. I must go call my father. I mean, she didn't even know what my father's room looked like, so those are some of the realities and the harsh realities that I remember from apartheid. I remember at one stage, we were visiting my grandmother's place. My great-grandmother, who died at the age of 116, was still alive at that time. It was in 1987. She was 114 years old. And I remember, you know, the government of then, the police officers coming in. I don't know who were they looking for. And they found these old ladies and little children, and they just didn't care. You know, they searched around and harassed everybody around, and they were just doing what they were commanded to do. So they're living under a constant state of fear and torture and humiliation and ridicule and being deprived from basic services. That was the order of the day during the apartheid eras.
Wow. In another meeting, I would love for you to talk about your great grandmother and what you
Yes,
may have learned from her and the history that she may have encountered. Another
indeed.
question about that era. You chose an academic career, so you must have been in high school still during the apartheid times, and then you later went to university. Is that correct?
Yeah, in fact, my father died in 1984 when I was 11 years old. And after he passed on, when just the year before I turned 12 years old, my mother gave me away to go and stay with my spiritual pastor, my spiritual father, my pastor, in a township called Motedema. And I stayed with my spiritual mother and father. I had no hope of going to university. But despite that, that did not stop me from working very hard and studying. You know, it is said it is better to be prepared and not have opportunities than to have opportunities only to find that you are not prepared for those opportunities. So upon finishing my grade 12, I remember going to my spiritual mother and I said, "Hey, Mom, I passed. I'm going to look for a job in Johannesburg." And she said, no, you're not going to do that. I'm sending 2 of my children to Velcom. So I was not actually the one coming to Velcom. It was my spiritual father's son and daughter who were coming to Velcom. And they said, well, if we were to add 1 more child, I think, you know, we will be able to manage. And that is how I came to Velcom back in those years in 1991. And I came here, I enrolled for a 4-year degree in education. Initially, I wanted to be a lawyer because I was inspired by my history teacher. So I wanted to be a lawyer, but when I came here, they said, no, we don't have any law. So then I had to make do, you know, and I enrolled for a 4-year degree in education. And I wanted to be a history teacher, just like my history teacher who inspired me. So that's how I came to university. It was, you know, when you watch Titanic, Jack will say, I got on the boat through a lucky hand of poker. Mm-hmm. So, well, I can also say the same thing, that I came to university through the lucky hand of the Lord. And that's how I found myself in Melbourne.
You said something very profound about preparing for a door to open even though the door is not yet open.
Exactly.
So I believe we also make our own luck and we cooperate with luck, because if you were a lazy student and you did not have the credentials to go to university, that door wouldn't have opened. And I think that's profound advice, that yes, even if the door seems to be closed, still prepare for when it opens. I love that.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's very profound.
Because you never know what might happen.
Right. So you did undergraduate university, and what was your first job after you graduated?
Well, then I did undergraduate university, and I took psychology as an additional subject, not as a major. I wanted to be a history and English teacher. And boy, literature happened to be very difficult for me. And I had to drop out, I had to leave English, just after passing it in my first year. Then I decided, what can I do? Then somebody advised me and said, if you study psychology up to, and take it as a measure, it can actually be considered as a school subject, because then you can become a guidance teacher. So I said, bingo, then I'll become a history teacher and a guidance teacher. So that's how I continued with psychology. It was because I was running away from English, which was very difficult for me. And like I said, when I came to university, psychology was only an additional subject. And then after finishing my 4-year qualification, qualified as a teacher, looking forward to being employed. And to my disappointment, then I was unemployed. I couldn't find any employment. Looked everywhere, knocked on all of the school principals' offices, hoping that one of them will open a door, and nothing happened. And then I decided, you know what, instead of going home, put my head between the legs and wonder what's going to happen, I better find meaning. And I decided to buy time, let me go back to university and study an honors degree in psychology. So I thought I was buying time, but only to find that destiny was coming, into contact with my situation. I thought that just going to university, I'll just buy time and an opportunity will come, I'll become a history teacher. But then still, none of the schools could employ me. And I had to study my honors degree in psychology over 2 years because it was part-time. I was studying in the evening, and during the day, I was a student assistant in the Department of Psychology. And one day, I was in the office of my lecturer, and she said to me, Solomon, I have a job for you. And I was like surprised. So what do you want me to do for you? Mark 100 scripts for you, pick boxes for you, make photocopies? And she's like, no. She was like, no, I have a real job for you. The child guidance clinic in Welkom is looking for somebody to stand in the place of a colleague who was going to study at Tavistock Clinic in London. So they were looking for someone to come in just for 4 months. And that's how I got my first job. I went there, called to be a replacement for somebody for 4 months. And that person decided, no, I'm not coming back after 4 months. I'm going to extend my stay in London by another year. So that meant they extended my contract at the child guidance clinic by another year, and when you get an opportunity, no matter how small, do everything within your powers to impress. And I did everything in my powers to impress. And by the end of the 4 years, they decided, by the end of the 1 year, they decided, no, we want to continue working with you despite the fact that the colleague was back. And you will be surprised that I never had a permanent employment with the clinic. The contract was renewed each and every 3 months for a period of 30 months. That means the contract was renewed 10 times. But it was meant to be, because by the end of the 30 months, I applied to Wits for a scholarship to go and study a master's degree in psychology. And when you've got 3 months contracts, you can't have long-term debt. You are only living from hand to mouth, and so you can only make 6 months debts, but not longer than that, because you don't have a permanent job. They wouldn't even allow you to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And that actually assisted me, because by the end of the 30 months, I received the scholarship to go and study full-time at Wits, and it was easy for me to resign. Then I resigned from the child guidance clinic, went to Wits, studied there, became a counseling psychologist, and the same university where I studied from first year until honors appointed me to become the resident psychologist. That's how I came back to Welkom.
Wonderful, wonderful recollection. Yeah. I met your lovely wife and children at a
Yes,
subsequent visit to the States. When did you get together
great.
with Nanki, and when did you start your family?
Actually, before I met with my wife, when I was still a student, I have an elder daughter. She turned 29 this year. She was born in 1994. She was actually born when I was still in my fourth year at university. So that's one of the things why I was so desperately looking for a job, because I was already a father by the age of 21. You know, so I was desperate and I was looking for a job. So I had a child from my previous relationship and things didn't work out. And then I moved on with my life. And then I met my wife in 2004 in Velcom. She was actually an intern uh, 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 doctor next to our university in the regional hospital called Bongane Regional Hospital. So she was an intern medical practitioner there. And then we met, we dated, and it was in the same year that I paid Lobola. You have to pay the bridal dowry in South Africa. And then a year later, on the 2nd of April, we got married. And then a year later, on the 19th of April, our firstborn, on the second daughter to myself, first daughter to my wife, was born on the 19th of April, 2005. Yes. And then our son, Tatoya One, meaning the will, God's will, was born on the 16th of December in 2010. And then our fourth born, Boshali, meaning wisdom, was born on the 19th of October 2015. So yeah, we have 3 daughters and 1 son.
That that's wonderful.
Indeed.
Yes, and if you find Solomon on Facebook, you can become his friend, and you'll see lots of pictures of his wonderful family. Let's
Thank
go
you.
back to Viktor Frankl
Yeah.
and logotherapy. Um,
Mm.
for those who are watching who are thinking, logo what? How would you explain, in your words, what logotherapy and what Viktor Frankl meant to you?
Well, we have contemporary science, and we also have contemplative science. And logotherapy falls within the spectrum of contemplative science. I trained as a psychologist, and I was taught all the different, I was introduced to different schools of thoughts in psychology: psychoanalysis, behavior therapy, person-centered therapy, you name them. But amazingly, nothing was said about logotherapy. Nothing. If in most books, the only section, or if they were to mention logotherapy, it will be just in a paragraph, perhaps in a chapter on positive psychology. But not much was said about Viktor Frankl. I didn't also know Frankl as well until when I did my master's degree, and then I finished the coursework. I went for internship. Just before I finished my internship, I was just a few days away from finishing my internship. I remember it was in December 2000 when my flatmate called me and said, "Hey, Solomon, thugs broke into our apartment and they stole everything." And I went back to our apartment, and indeed everything was gone. Went to visit a psychologist, and she helped me. She was good. I thank her. The signs and symptoms of loss and depression and anxiety indeed came under control. But I could feel that there was something, I could feel that I have been emptied. My music system that I loved so much, that used to make so much noise around me, was gone. And now there was just complete silence, emptied. And I remember talking to my mom, and I related the story to her. And she said, son, they stole things, they did not steal your life. You still have your life. What are you going to do with it? You see, when you are hungry and a prophecy comes, you become activated. And then I was activated. And I became aware of the emptiness. I lived in that particular moment. I became mindful of it, that I am in this situation, there's emptiness, and I didn't even know what to expect out of this emptiness. I was not troubled by it, but I could just sense that something good is going to happen in my life. And I remember going to the library at Wits University, supernaturally went to the 4th floor, supernaturally went to this bookshelf, and I came across a book titled On the Way to Meaning. And I asked myself, on the way to meaning? I remember my father will always say, we are children of the way, but I don't know about the way to meaning. Is this way to meaning? And then I read that book. That book was authored and was edited by Dr. Petty Havenga Kotzie, may her soul rest in peace. And in it were contributions from respective South African authors on how the work of Dr. Viktor Frankl, impacted them in their lives. And after reading all of their testimonies, I said to myself, if all of these people and all of them are saying they've been impacted in a highly spiritual way by this person, who is this person? Went to the library, searched through the computer, bingo! Men's Search for Meaning was in that library. And same night I borrowed the book, went to read it. I couldn't put it down. And that is how I came into contact with the man himself, Dr. Viktor Frankl, talking about men's search for meaning, that everything in this life happens for a reason. And now I came to understand that those thugs came into my life for a reason, so that they can take away all of the distractions. And I could be left by myself yearning for something to fill the void inside of me. And as Dr. Frankl is saying, suffering plus meaning equals fulfillment, and suffering minus meaning equals despair. And as a result, then I was mentored by him, and that is how I came to study, to read on the work of Viktor Frankl by myself. And I even did my PhD in a topic related to sense of meaning and purpose. The title of my doctoral studies was Sense of Meaning, Meaning in Life, and Life Stressors as Predictors of First-Year Academic Performance. We wanted to know what is the most significant predictor of first-year academic performance. And we discovered that a high sense of meaning, parental support, and a good grade 12 score, those are the 3 significant predictors of first-year academic performance. And that's how I came across the work of Dr. Frankl, and it has he inspired me in a mighty way. And until I came, it's because of those facts that now I have this uncle that who's interviewing me now. So without those facts, this meeting is not there.
Yeah.
So out of that pain, we have this purpose. So it started as the pain, and now it's, the purpose is unfolding each and every year, from meeting Dr. Frankl, meeting Dr. Chantal, who was my external examiner, by the way, for my PhD thesis. I remember when I went to the logotherapy conference in 2009, she saw my name tag and she's like, Solomon Makola, do you know me? I said, I don't know you. She's like, hey, I'm Dr. Chantal. I was your external examiner. Wow, small world, you know? And I don't even know how I landed in Dallas, Texas. I don't know. I just found myself there in 2009. And all things, unfolded from then until now.
I love the meaning story. If you have not read Man's Search for Meaning, I would strongly recommend it. It's very easy to acquire. It's a must-read book for
Indeed.
everyone, and it's been translated into many languages. A quick story: when I was first dating my wife, lovely Willow is her nickname, and we were starting, talking and walking, and she asked what I was interested in, and I said I was very interested in Viktor Frankl and logotherapy, and Man's Search for Meaning was a very influential book, and she had just read it in Mandarin, and it was immediate something in common. So I think logotherapy had something to do with the course of my life in many, many dimensions, including meeting my wife and meeting my nephew.
Indeed.
And meeting a lot of wonderful people. So
yeah,
please read Man's Search for Meaning. I've read it 3 times. I listened to the audiobook. It's and the book Guideposts to Meaning is now available. It's been republished. Also very, very important book.
Indeed.
Meaning is one
and
of
it is
our
considered one of the best self-help. It's actually, listed as one of the best self-help books by the New York Times. And it's still considered the best, one of the best self-help books.
Yes, and it's
Yeah.
it's sold millions and millions of copies. Meaning is one
Indeed.
of the 8 pillars of contentment.
Yes.
And as you see, meaning is on the bottom. They're all connected. And
yes,
as the time goes on, we want to interview people who are involved in these pillars. And you're involved in the meaning pillar, the mind pillar as an academic, the emotional pillar as a psychologist, because feeling and thinking are different. But I want you to talk a little bit about the spiritual pillar. How was it that you became a pastor?
Well, as I told you, I am a child of the way. Remember, I told you, I said during the Group Areas Act, my family moved from the place of refuge to where they are staying now in a village called Daffelkop. We arrived there when I was 2 years old in 1975. And then in 1977, something mysterious happened. I turned blind, completely blind, for about 6 months or so. I couldn't see. And in fact, later on, I had signs and symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder as a result of that. And in the midst of the blindness, my parents took me everywhere. I mean, literally everywhere. They took me to doctors. They took me to prophets. They took me to witch doctors. Well, they are no longer called witch doctors, apologies. They are called traditional healers. They took me, well, see, that's the language that was used during the apartheid eras. They will say our traditional healers are witch doctors. And that is an offensive word. So they are called traditional healers. So they took me to traditional healers. And I still remained blind. And one day my mother went to visit my great-grandmother, who died at the age of 116, as I said earlier on. And when she was still able to read the Bible, even at that age, without any spectacles. So she found him reading the Bible during the hour of prayer at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And she arrived and she was with me and said, well, Anna, so how are things with your son? And my mother, being the grandchild to her, said, well, things are still the same. The boy still can't see. And my spiritual father said, well, my great grandmother said, there's a place I want you to go. Take this child to. You will meet a man there, a man of God, who will be able to talk to you. He's a Christian mystic. And after the conversation and after, the prayer services, let's wait and see what the Lord will do for this child. And that is how my mother and my father took me to my spiritual father. And then when we got there, there was a church gathering as usual. And then to cut the long story short, immediately after the church gathering, after the church session, the next day, I was able to see, so that is how I met my spiritual father. Now, ironically, my father's name is David, and my name is Solomon, which suggests that my father is a Christian. And like I said, because we used to stay in that place of refuge. But later on, he found himself, in ancestral worship practices and all of those things, and didn't believe in church. And ultimately, there was a constant disagreement between her and my mom when it comes to issues of church. But God being God, I suppose then he decided to call him back home so that I can have all the wonderful time with the men of God who will be able to mentor me about issues of the Lord. And like I said, after my father died, my mother gave me away to go and stay with my spiritual father. My spiritual father subsequently took me to university, but each and every week for an hour, we have a mentoring session with him, and it's been going on for many years. So in our way of worship, it's also related to the book that you gave me, The Soul of the Story, by Rabbi David Zeller, that, there are some people who become rabbis through the conventional way of going through formal training, but there are others who become one through training from a mentor or from a spiritual father. So I also happen to be one of the people who was trained, I mean, even today, I just had my 1 hour session with my father during the day. Once a week, we have a 1 hour session wherein he will mentor me, he will teach me, he will encourage me about issues of the Lord. And he specifically said, I will take you to university to study about men, but I will teach you about God myself. So when a time came, as I ascended the ladder of spiritual awakening, then at the right time, then he anointed me bishop and said, now you can be a bishop in your own house and do for your children what I have done for you. Teach them about God yourself. If I read about the story of Rabbi David, is it David Zeller?
Zeller,
and,
yeah.
And Rabbi Shlomo, they had the same relationship as well, a father and a son relationship. So I suppose, from the stories that I told about my father, you could gather as well that here is a story about another man who also walked the same, route that you walked, of being mentored by someone until they were released to become a teacher. So yeah, that is how I became a kingdom professor, taught by my father. So
That's
that's how I
amazing.
became a Joseph. That's how I became a Joseph to him. And yeah, he taught me everything and clothed me in a robe of many colors. So that's how I look at myself just like Joseph. 1 minute I'm a psychologist, the next minute I'm a professor, the next minute I'm a campus director, the next minute I'm in charge of the institutional renewal and transformation. The next minute I'm a motivation speaker. The premier wants me to accompany him somewhere. The next minute I'm a researcher, I'm presenting papers in conferences, and yeah, next minute I'm a father, next minute I'm a husband. So yeah, that's it. All of those benefits came because I had a father who put a robe of many colors on me, and that's how I became who I am.
And you still have a father that you can talk with once a week. That's wonderful. Um,
Yes, he is
yeah,
88 years old.
that's beautiful. I
Yeah.
lost my father when I was 26, and
Mm,
he was a wonderful mentor. By the way,
yeah, sure.
his name was David as well. And
Oh,
yes, and
okay.
I named my
Yeah.
son after my father. So my son's name is David, and my grandson's
Yes.
name is Solomon. So
Wow.
so now I have
Wow.
a
Wow.
grandson
So
Solomon
it's,
and a nephew Solomon. So it's a beautiful
and
name.
my father was David.
Yeah. So we
Yeah,
have a lot in common.
we
And
do. We
yes,
do.
so we've touched on a lot of different things. I will
Mm,
put references in the book, The Soul of the Story, references to
yes.
Guideposts to Meaning, reference to Man's Search for
Yes.
Meaning. But I'd like you to take, before we end this, you wrote a book kind of inspired by um, Rabbi Zeller about remarkable women. Could you tell us a little bit
Yes.
about this book?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. My first book was titled Find Meaning, Stop Wondering, and it's a collection of all the research that I did in the field of logotherapy. And then I wrote my second book titled Pimp the Pain, Purpose-Inspired Dialogues. In other words, when life gives you lemons, make lemonade.
Hmm.
Then Dr. Viktor Frankl says, when knowledge gives up, the torch is handed over to faith. Because you see, as researchers, we are so much interested in getting to know everything about everybody else except ourselves. And this is where Frankl started when he wrote Man's Search for Meaning. And then people went further to conduct research in the field of meaning. Then I also decided, I said, I want to go into myself and discover who am I, beyond this mask that I put on for self-protection. Who am I beyond this title of professor? Who am I beyond this job of a psychologist? Who am I beyond these responsibilities of being a father? Who am I? And then I went back. I remember I was invited to one school. It was on Women's Day. And they said, come and speak to address an audience of women. I said, an audience of women? I'm a man. How can they request me to come and address an audience of women? And it was in 2012. And I said, well, can I tell you about 12 significant women in my life? And that's how it started. I spoke about these 12 women and what they did for me and in my life. And as I was sitting down, and as I said, logotherapy is contemplative science. As I was sitting down and contemplating and looking back and meditating and looking at all the wonderful things that happened in my life, then I discovered that God brought so many women in my life, and whenever I came across a locked door, God will always send a woman into my life to hand me a key to unleash potential. And miraculously, the potential that they unleashed will always be related to something that my father taught me about. But I didn't have any understanding until I had a practical situation and I came into contact with one of the women who unleashed potential and helped me to understand something that I did not understand about my life. So that is how I wrote this book titled 70 Women and One Man. So it's about the journey of 70 women that I met in my life, starting with my great-grandmother, like I always say, who died at the age of 116, until my 7-year-old daughter, who's only in grade 2. All the wisdom that I learned from all of these women. Some of them are still alive, others have passed on. Black, white, colored, some are educated, some not educated, some are religious, others not religious. Women coming from the walks of life. Some are professors, others have never been to school. One of them is even the president of the Supreme Court of South Africa, so Supreme Court of Appeal in South Africa, this is one remarkable woman that I met. She's the counselor of our university. I mean, I went through so much difficulties in one stage. And like Viktor Frankl is saying, when a person is being released from a situation where you had experienced a provisional existence, you just want to tell everybody about what you have been through. And he was saying when people were released immediately from the concentration camp, some just wanted to eat until they ballooned and ballooned and ballooned and became very fat. Even myself. So when I came out of this situation, I just wanted to tell and relate the situation to whoever had to listen. And I just wanted to tell them, do you know what happened? And until this lady, who's the president of the Supreme Court of Appeal, I was sitting on the same table with her, and she around the same table, and then she wanted to know, who are you? And I told her a little bit about my story, and I wanted to tell her about my ordeal and the pain and the torture that I went through. And she went ahead to relate to me a story of a man who went through a similar situation. And then she says, but a day before, or when this man was basically a church leader and then was placed on precautionary suspension that never had an ending. And then ultimately, when the church board decided we are lifting the suspension, went to this man's office, they found him hanging on the ceiling because he had waited too long. He couldn't wait any longer until he took his life. And she said to me, I'm telling you this story because you waited so long to come out of this situation and you didn't take your life. You are still here. You lived to tell the story. And that reminded me of what Dr. Frankl will say. He will say, we should stop counting the days that went by and take pride in a time lived up to the fullest. To say you lived up to the fullest. You lived to tell the story. You didn't give up even in the midst of the situation. And therefore, stop counting and stop looking, stop, indicating who did what, when, how, but concentrate on the fact that you survived. And that is all that matters. Concentrate on the fact that you are still here. And that is all that matters. Live in the now. Stop living in the past. Live in the now. Take this day and this moment as being precious to say, you are still here. What are you going to do with the time that you still have in your life? And, so that's part one story. And there are 69 other stories that I wrote about all of these women.
Yes, I read
and of
the
course,
book.
like I said, the one man is not me.
No, I read the book. I bought it on Kindle, and you can buy
Yes,
this
thank
on,
you.
yeah,
It's available
Amazon.
on Kindle.
Yeah,
Yes,
you
yes,
can
it's
buy
available
it
on
on
Kindle.
Amazon Kindle, or if you have one of those subscriptions that you can read all
Yes,
the books
yes,
you want in a year, you can find it there. I think that
yes.
there's not yet the hard copies in the United States, but the
Yeah,
Kindle one is just fine. and I'll put a
Yes.
reference to that in the
Thank you.
interview notes. A lot of
Thank
why
you.
you are and who you are came from the
Indeed.
influence of those people, and
Yes.
it's a beautiful thing to do. Um, and I have one more question.
It,
In your bio,
yes.
talking about the Forgiveness Project, can you talk a little bit
Oh,
about
yes.
that one? Yeah.
Yeah. I was actually a research fellow with Virginia Commonwealth University in the United States. Professor Everett Worthington came to Africa and he was conducting studies in Ghana and South Africa. And I applied and I happened to be one of the forgiveness research fellows who was invited to participate in the study. Now, Prof. Worthington came up with a wonderful intervention called the Rich Forgiveness Intervention. Rich, R-E-A-C-H. R stands for recall the head. A stands for give the altruistic gift of forgiveness. E stands for empathize. C stands for commit to forgiveness. And then H stands for hold on to forgiveness. So it's a 6-session process that can be done over a period of 6 weeks or 6 days, 6 sessions, wherein through a psychoeducation mechanism, people are taught how to forgive. Because oftentimes we command people and tell them forgive, but not every day do we teach them how do I go through the process that precedes the promise of forgiving, because forgiving is the promise. But, how do I go through the process until I arrive at that stage where I have a forgiving heart? And we are saying we want to bring forgiveness to each and every forgiving heart in each and every home and in each and every homeland.
I'm hoping, if we talk about hope, that we can do a separate session on
Yes,
forgiveness,
indeed.
and more conversations on meaning. And
Yes,
you've had a very, very interesting life. Um, I'm privileged to have you in my life. And
amen.
a little tip, Solomon has a lot of Facebook friends, but he still responds to messages. He still hasn't been so famous that he's been deluged by millions of emails and requests. So he would be
Thank
a great,
you.
great person to get to know. And
Thank you.
I want to thank you so much for the
Thank you.
time. And I
Thank you
hope we
very
can
much.
continue to have some wonderful dialogues. And
Yes, yes.
yes,
Thank you very much for having me here. I did have a wonderful time with you, Uncle. Wonderful family time that we had.
good. And again, you're listening to the Voice of Meaning channel. Please like, please subscribe. And if you hit the little bell, you'll get a notification every time we're going to try to publish an interesting interview every week, as well as some wonderful intuitive music, mostly composed by my wife and another
Yes,
good friend. So please
indeed.
support the channel and buy Solomon's book. It's very, very interesting. It's very
Thank
fun,
you.
and
Thank
it's
you.
so important to acknowledge
Thank you.
the people both living and gone who have influenced our
Yes.
lives, and you have
Thank you.
influenced mine. So
Thank you.
all the best to you until next time.
Thank you very much. Thank you.